It's an honor for me to moderate this session today, and because this conversation is quite important. And this conversation sits at the very heart of Africa's democratic journey. Across the continent, elections have become ritualistic, held regularly, but too often lacking in credibility, participation, and meaning. We've mastered the art of ticking boxes, registering voters, setting up polling stations, announcing results, yet many citizens still feel excluded, unheard, and unsafe. So the question before us today is a bold and urgent one. How do we move beyond procedural democracy to achieve substantive democracy? How do we ensure that elections in Africa are not just periodic power contests, but true instruments of the will of the people that are anchored in fairness, inclusivity, and transformative governance? Today, I will be joined by a brilliant panel of individuals who have worked at the front line, who have worked at the front line of elections, policy, governance, and civic organizing. And together, we will interrogate the gaps, confront the contradictions, and hopefully chart a path forward for African democracy that work for the people, not just for the powerful. To begin with, I'll start to introduce Ruth Makudhu. Ruth has played a key role in shaping electoral reforms in Kenya and has participated in high review of political laws in Kenya. She has also been part of the civil society movement, and Ruth has been able to drive critical legal reforms that have impacted candidate selection, party finance, and democratic integrity in Kenya. Help me appreciate and welcome Ruth Makudhu. I will introduce also Tito Magoti. Tito is a seasoned human rights lawyer from Tanzania and has worked with the Legal and Human Rights Center and has worked with other several organizations in the space. Tito has paid the price of being in this space. Tito has been persecuted, detained, and over alleged crimes for raising his voice in Tanzania, tied to his online activism. Tito is an institution, for those who know him. And he has been held under questionable charges. And Tito is an alumni of the Human Rights Center. Please help me appreciate Tito. Joining Tito and Ruth will be Michael Aboneka, who is a constitutional and civic space expert. And Aboneka has emerged as a thought leader in the space in the recent days. Please help me appreciate Michael Aboneka. Finally, we have Brenda Isabel. Brenda is a specialist in governance and electoral systems. Brenda currently serves as the Senior Elections and Governance Specialist at Elgia. Please help me welcome Brenda. Thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you for making time for this panel. Right into it. I'll give each and every one of you 10 minutes to speak to what you had prepared on this very topic, and then we'll proceed with the questions. We'll start with Ruth. Karibu sana, Ruth.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning once again.
Good morning.
I like her from Uganda. She's so jovial. Yeah, please keep it up. I'm happy to be here, and I'll be honest and say that I slightly over-prepared for this. So 10 minutes won't cut it, but I'll try and cut down my presentation. I know some of you might know me, so I'll just allow me to be honest and say that I do work for the EMB of Kenya, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, as the manager, legal reforms, political parties liaison, and campaign financing. However, I am here as an ICJ member, not on behalf of my boss, okay? So, yes, I just wanted to let that be stated. Now, I'll start with a quote. It's a quote by Leo Tolstoy that says, everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. All right? So I felt that it was a good quote because what we are discussing is about change and so many things that we want done. I'll start by stating that across Africa, the practice of democracy has largely centered around elections, offering citizens the opportunity to shape the future of their countries. It is envisioned that every electoral process reflects people's aspirations and the progress of democratic institutions. While some countries have built strong traditions of peaceful transitions, other countries continue to refine their electoral systems to enhance transparency, inclusivity, and national unity. Case in point is Botswana and Zambia. To make elections in Africa truly democratic, regular, free, fair, simple, credible, and transparent elections, there is need to go beyond mechanisms of just voting and build systems that earn public trust and deliver real representation. So I'll skim through this. I had gone into the historical context of colonial legacies and contemporary electoral systems, but I don't think that we'll have time to go through that. However, I'll just highlight something that Mamdani states, that the roots of many African political challenges can be traced back to the colonial rule. Colonial administrations established centralized governance structures that prioritized control rather than participation. Could that be the challenge that we have inherited as Africa? Could that be? So I also want us to look at democratic experiments and emerging models. Now, despite those historical constraints, African nations have demonstrated encouraging progress towards substantive democracy. I'll start with Ghana. Most of us know Ghana in terms of its election process. We use their case law, we use everything. In fact, what IBC did was to borrow largely what their electoral or their legal framework provides. It shows a symbol of peaceful electoral transitions and effective electoral commissions. In South Africa, the post-apartheid constitutional framework combined with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission helped rebuild civic trust and institutional legitimacy. This is similarly what we used post the 2007 electoral violence in Kenya that spurred critical reforms, particularly electoral governance, judicial independence, which have greatly improved the credibility of electoral processes. Senegal similarly has done certain things to institute national change. These cases illustrate that when citizens are engaged and institutions are resilient, democracy thrives beyond the ballot box. Makofi? There's also aspects that I looked at persistent challenges to electoral democracy. The first one is public trust. We sing every so often about public trust. And I did look at Afrobarometer survey of 2023 that states that public trust in democracy is declining in Africa in a very high rate. So there's a show of growing dissatisfaction with democratic institutions across multiple countries. What are we going to do about it? In addition, African electoral commissions and judicial systems frequently lack the independence and authority to enforce democratic norms. Additionally, there is minuscule inclusion of marginalized groups, the youth, women, persons with disabilities, ethnic minorities. When I look at our party list system that we use, the proportional representation, the way it is developed, it is based on a political party's interest. not necessarily the interest of those that get into the list. So what else can be done for purposes of ensuring that there is fairness when that is done? Now, I looked at also strategies for advancing substantive democracy. And the first thing that I looked on is the institutional independence. What is independence? We talk about independence, but what is independence? My personal view is that independence is money. When you don't have money, you're not independent as an institution. Because as a public institution, you get your money from the taxpayers, which is allocated by the National Treasury. Judiciary has the same, but they have a judiciary fund. IBC in Kenya is meant to have an IBC fund, but it has never been implemented since that law came into force in 2012. We have tried, it has never seen the light of day. So what else do we do? The second thing is voter education and civic education, which should be prioritized to foster political literacy and democratic values among citizens. When you look at the World Bank report of 2022, Kenya's literacy levels have incredibly increased to 82.88%. But when you look at other countries that have 100% literacy levels, we have a long way to go. Finally, on that, there is need to provide sufficient resources to facilitate EMB processes. As we speak, there is a challenge in terms of resources. I know this is a touchy subject when it comes to monies in elections, but I would like to ask us, we normally talk about India, we talk about Mexico, we talk about US, we talk about Rwanda. We compare ourselves with jurisdictions that don't have the same electoral system as Kenya. So it cannot be the same, and we cannot use those ones as benchmarks for purposes of declaring or discussing finances in Kenya. Number one, we have our young people in this room. Would you work for IBC for free? Those 5 days, would you work for free? Most of these countries, you find that it is they either volunteer or it is government employees that are deployed to those stations. Now in Kenya, I dare ask, would you trust government, other from mainstream government, to come and work for IBC? The teachers used to be our presiding officers, now they are not, all right? So it is a question of, we need to look further and look at our own system and see what it is that we can do for purposes of enhancing inclusive participation and also trying to enhance our integrity in terms of our election process. There's something else I wanted to discuss, the political parties as well. I'll give you a guess. How many political parties do you think we have? Quickly, I don't have time. How many? Huh? 15? Another try? Just one more try? Yes? Sorry? 85. We have 91 political parties as at last month, but there are 2 political parties that have joined, so maybe it's 93. When you compare with the world statistics, you'll find that not many countries have the number that we have in Kenya, and largely in Africa. What does it say about our systems? All right? I'm trying to finish, I know, before he comes. The engagement with the media, free press. In 2022, our late chairman, Wafula Chebukati, requested the media to do a tally as well. What happened to the tally? Alama ya dukuduku. However, what I'll say is there is need to protect journalists and media outlets that report on elections and governance. We need to have better engagement, and even with the MOUs that we normally have with the media, there's need for them to have a collegial sort of engagement, so that even if they tally, because where do we get the verifiability of our elections? it is through those systems. So that if someone comes and says, you've announced this result, but this is what I got from the polling station, nobody ever comes to say that. Yet, we still keep on saying that kura imeibiwa, something has been stolen. Yet, at no point does anyone come and say, actually, this is what I got from the polling station and it is different. In the advent of technology, how do we combat disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, and deep fakes? I think a few months ago, I saw a very serious, I'll call it a deep fake, where two senators were, you know, it was a hug, but it ended up being something else. And you're left wondering, if this is AI doing that, what happens with elections, you know? So what are we going to do? Do we again go back and regulate or legislate against this? How much is too much? And how much is less? Digital rights, the aspect of prevention of internet shutdowns during elections, which will undermine transparency. I think it's something that we need to think about. And I'll go to the last bit. The aspect of importance of free, fair, credible, and transparent elections in Africa. I still believe that under Article 81 of the Constitution of Kenya, the principles of elections that are provided for under that article, we have over-legislated our electoral process to the extent that even the milk that we give our presiding officers is actually regulated, not in a proper statute, but it is in a guideline. That is how much we have regulated. They get 500 ml of milk, 500 ml of soda, 500 ml of water. They get a loaf of bread, because you give them that. You can classify it as a dry meal, because you never want them to be in a situation where someone comes to offer them a meal. You know what will happen? There will be no election. Some might sleep. They'll be dragged and stuff like that. It happened a while back. So that is what informed that decision. So when you look at Article 81, it provides that free elections shall be by secret ballot. Do we have that in Kenya? Do we have that in most African countries? Yes. I was actually looking at the Rwandan election. They even close it. I don't know whether that makes it more secret. Like they put a curtain over it. And is it free from violence? Sometimes not. Intimidation, improper influence or corruption, conducted by an independent body, that happens, transparent, etc. We even have transparent ballot boxes. How much transparent is transparent, you know? So I think our challenge as Africans is that our elections are mostly euphoric, either geared towards tribal lines, political lines, whatever your party leader says goes, or, you know, etc. And it becomes a challenge for us to see beyond that. I pray for a day when we look at elections as just a normal activity, like the way you go to work and come back in the evening, without necessarily having that. We are strongly invested in elections, and we need to stop being so invested, because then we get, I don't want to say it but we get even to the extent of getting skewed analysis, and we never actually sit down to analyze what happens with elections. So I think the other part was on technology, but that one I can deal with it later. The only last thing that I want us to highlight is that the legal reforms or the legislation reforms that we normally push through, we start early. But I'll tell you, in 2022, they were never passed, okay? Post 2022, we have been struggling to get these bills passed. Unfortunately, as we speak, the Elections Amendment Bill, the Political Parties Amendment Bill, the Election Offences Amendment Bill, and the County Government's Amendment Bill are pending in Parliament. All right? And we are one year, a few months shy of the next general election. When will we train our election officials? When will political parties be trained on what they need to do? When will so many things be done? Recruitment of commissioners is underway, but yes, there's a court process that is pending. And finally, the aspect of delimitation of boundaries. That has been pending because of certain issues that are happening in the court. So I don't want to, get into that because of the sub judice rule. But other than that, I wish that all EMBs, not just in Kenya, but in Africa, may be supported throughout an election cycle, not just a few months to the elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for those insights. I think you made it very clear for us to thrive beyond the ballot and for us to achieve substantive democracy, then EMBs need to be independent. And at the heart of independence then is financial strength. And then you mentioned something on us being driven by elections. And that leads me to the next panelist, who is Michael Aboneka. As we segue into that conversation, as you give us your perspectives, Michael, how do we shift the focus from winning elections to delivering public goods and justice? And what tools can citizens use to demand this shift? Karibu sana, Michael.
Asante. Thank you very much. I want to thank the ICJ and the foundation. I just want to ask in this room, how many people have voted before in this room? Okay. How many people want to vote again? How many people don't want to vote at all? Great. So the verdict is already out there. So I want to start with, you see, elections are not just an event. It's a process. And the way most of the East African countries are treating elections, they're treating it as an event. They will deploy heavily. They will do whatever it takes to make sure that they get what they want from elections. Another point is that, like Charles de Gaulle said, I think the French call it Charles de Gaulle, politics is a matter too serious to be left to politicians alone. Politics is a matter too serious to be left to politicians alone. Now, that's why the issue of participation comes in. But guess what? We are being participated instead of participating. Okay? We are being participated instead of participating. You have all these many members of parliament. You have all these governors. Like for Uganda, we have, I think the Ugandan parliament is almost equal to that of India. We are almost having 600 members of parliament for a population of 45 million Ugandans. And you see, India has almost the same. It has 2 billion, almost 2 billion, the population is 2 billion. So when you have 600 members of parliament in parliament, and what they do there is disconnected from what I aspire, then I am being participated. I am not participating in the process. When they sit in their caucuses and they agree and say, let us remove term limit. By the way, Uganda has no term limit. It has no age limit. But we have the grace of God. So we hope that the grace of God will return the age limit and the term limit. And I think Kenya has that, and I'm told that Kenya is trying to emulate Uganda. Please don't allow them. But the point is that at the center of it all, as citizens, we give government two things. We give them the votes, that's the power, and we give them the taxes. What do we expect? We expect efficient and adequate services. Now, that is the social contract. So if that is not happening, then we have reason to disappoint the people we have appointed, but at the same time, demand for accountability. Now that's part of my presentation. So I think let me go into it. We have in Uganda, we did. I've been in this sector for about the last 15 years, and the things we used to do was the Citizen Manifesto. We don't wait for politicians to come and tell us what they want to do for us. There's one who even said, "I'll build for you a bridge." Then they reminded him that there is no river here. He said, "Even the river I'll bring." You can imagine, and he was voted. So then we need as citizens to have our manifesto. As citizens of Kenya, as citizens of Uganda, as citizens of South Sudan, meanwhile South Sudan is about to have its election, hopefully 2026 December. They have been postponing. What are the issues of South Sudanese? What are the issues of Uganda on health? So we have a process called the Citizen Manifesto, which a bit was hijacked, but the point was that these are our key concerns as citizens. This is what the Uganda we need. And therefore, we actually, I remember that time I was a young, energetic, maybe I'm still here, university student. So we moved with a commitment book to political parties, telling them commit to our issues as citizens. Now, once they are in power, then we do what we call the accountability. We ask you, how far have you gone with our promises? Because politicians are going to come and tell you, I'll be the chief mourner. If you vote for me, I'll never miss a burial. But that's not their role. So we need as citizens to have our own citizen manifesto. Now, on the other thing, the problem we are having is the fatherism, the longevity. The question I asked my colleague from Tanzania is that Magufuli left, Nyerere left, but did Nyererism will leave? Museveni will leave, but will Musevenism leave? It can even be a rhyme, yeah? Museveni leaves, Museveni stays, So will that happen? If Kagame left, will Kagameism leave? So what you have is that you have CCM leaving. I mean, CCM is in power even when they change the leaders. So you have a fusion of the party and the state together. What has helped Kenya survive a bit is that there's a distinction. There's a state apparatus working. That tomorrow you have the Independent Police Oversight Authority summoning police for the excesses they're doing. That is a state function. Now, in situations like Uganda and other countries, there's a fusion. You can't separate between the NRM party in Uganda and the NRM government. You can't touch a state. Like you say, what is a state? Because a state and nation are supposed to be different. That the state, the institutions are working regardless of who the president is and who the party is. Now there's that problem, the longevity, the fatherism. Young people, you wait, don't talk to your fathers like that. Where were you when we were fighting? For your information, President Museveni came into power before I was born. He's in power, I have a child. And I have promised my son that by the time he votes, there will be another person to vote for. So that's why I do all this stuff. So for me, I wake up every morning, I'm like, but can't I, maybe I should stand for president. Because then I need to make a statement. Because the longevity and the staying long in power is another way to say that, the people have chosen. So dictatorships love elections because elections legitimize their dictatorship. All dictators, look around, Paul Biya, I was in Cameroon for over 5 months. Cameroon has 300 political opposition parties. Over 300 political parties. And I was asking them, how can you have 300 political parties and then the situation is as is? Okay? Now, Kenya, you have like 95, Uganda, you have like 29, but there is some work we are doing. So you have political parties that do not have a leveled playing ground. Our IBC, it is a presidential candidate who appoints an IBC. So the president appoints the IBC. So what does that mean? That if I have appointed you to manage an election, you have to make sure I win, because then you have to have your butter and bread. So the independence of the electoral commissions are important. As I wind up, I think for me is that because of that, the dictators love elections. Paul Kagame has been scoring 99%, and so, it was a democratic election. In Uganda, we had polling stations where the voting was 101 plus. And people asking, did the goats vote? Did the cows vote? Like, no one got sick. So the hands that went up to say, I no longer want elections, there is that fatigue of elections do not give us what we want. The power belongs to the people who shall determine how to be governed. Does that also mean that as Africa, we should start to think and say, maybe elections don't work for us? Can we have another means of how we be governed? It is also time to ask such questions because that is also democratic. So what we need to do is that we have to continue demanding for accountability and demanding that when Museveni leaves, the Musevenism also leaves. That if Ruto leaves, the Rutoism also leaves. And that is an issue of systems. For those working on systems and making sure that the fusion of the state and the nation and the party doesn't happen, let's continue the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Aboneka, for those insightful perspectives. And for those of you that have been around long enough, remember when Moi took over, alisema tutafuata nyayo. We will follow the footprints of that one that was before us. So it's a problem that we have. We inherit other people's problems and we continue with them. Thank you for the suggestion that we should have citizen manifestos that drive the political space, and that we should not be disinterested in politics, that it is too serious a thing to be left to politicians alone. And I think as you are finishing and indicating issues of institutions that have failed, then that segues into now Brenda's presentation. Brenda, as you also give us your perspectives, I think I would want to ask you is that many institutions and democratic processes have been captured by a few powerful individuals and groups for their benefit to the detriment of the general public and at the expense of public good. How is this capture manifesting itself? Which institutions are most affected? And who are the actors enforcing it? Karibu sana, Brenda.
Thank you very much, Thuku. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for this invitation by ICJ as well as the Foundation for Democracy. My name is Brenda Isabel. I work for the Electoral Law and Governance Institute for Africa. I am a senior elections and democratic governance advisor. Also, in my past life, I was a human rights activist. I still am. As I was having tea, there was a song about Maandamano. I remember charging there in the corner. I honestly feel like going out to protest because the things that we are seeing in Africa, generally in Kenya and the rest of the region, are things that we should not be seeing in this day and age. Allow me to just take you through a small journey of some very awkward facts about Africa. Africa is the only continent where, like my colleague from Uganda said, candidates go for elections and you have more votes than the registered voters, right? Okay, so I think we really need to have an honest conversation about elections. I was persuaded not to dive too deep into electoral matters because my blood is extremely, laced with election things because that is my bread and butter. But more importantly, I just wanted to echo something that Madam Ruth from IBC said earlier about the over-legislation of elections. You know, in Kenya, our main challenge is we don't trust each other. Because we don't trust each other, we decide, let us over-legislate elections so that it covers for the lack of trust. By that, we stress the IBC to a point where they are tied and bound. Ni kama umeweka mtu kamba. Kamba, for those who don't understand Swahili, is it's like tying someone with a rope, and they're unable to move because they're very stressed out with litigious situations constantly. They have to publish the voter register by this date, and it is literally in law. They can't do it outside that. So there's electoral timelines that are too tight. So this is an electoral commission that is literally bound by laws set by those who it is going to adjudicate over. You understand how it doesn't make sense? Now, IBC does not even have a budget of its own. Yes, it's in the law. They're supposed to have the IBC fund. But ever since that legislation was passed, of course, those people have frustrated and made sure IBC does not have resources of its own. So IBC has to run back to Bunge's parliament to get approvals for this and that, and run to Treasury asking for money. Kenyans spent in 2017, we spent 3.8 billion on electoral technology. But what happened? The next election, we were not able to use the same technology. Do you know why? Whenever IBC submits its budgets, there's a line item on its budget for maintaining software for technology. It will not be approved by Treasury. So at the next time, democracy has boiled down to our ability to make sure our children are safe in our homes, that my child can do, I saw a young Gen Z here taking us through, a song about letters. Ever since I was born, I was just seeing one president. I was in opinion, and we know these are state-sponsored goons. Yeah, where police will watch. Police can go and capture a young man from Homa Bay and track him. But we've not been told to date who raped these women. This country has CCTV. Does anyone have any idea that in this country, if you leave Pan-Afric, by the time you get to Thika Road, you've been captured 2 million times by the cameras in this city? Yeah? The surveillance on Kenyans is being used for abductions and bad reasons. But we cannot use the same technology to arrest perpetrators of violence. You know? I'm angry, I'm sorry. Yeah, and then there's, sorry? Inject. Mimi nikiwekwa kwa Subaru mnitete, nawaomba. Mimi maisha yangu ni soft, sijazoea vitu. Iyo. But we must inject, right? Yes, I mean, that's what we're here to do. We cannot sugarcoat these things. Yeah? And then we have to address underlying issues. The lack of employment. Doesn't matter what we do, democracy and governance, there's no stability for any country if the people are poor. If you cannot afford... Jana kuna watu walala njaa. Kweli rongo? Kuna mtu nyumba yake paa imebomoka, maji inaingia kwa nyumba. Let me ask you, na Gen Z pia nyinyi mna tabia mbaya. Because when you're protesting, when you see young men and women looking rough, you say, I see Gen Z. That is classism, and we pray that stops. Because do you remember there's a time in Kenya, about 61% of young people who cleared class 8 primary education did not go to Form 1. Mnafikiri walienda wapi? Wako tu mitaani. Wakitokea pia ni Gen Z. Gen Z is a demographic, it's not a class. It is just an age set, right? So mkiona hata wale ambao wanakani kama, I think there's this thing of people think Gen Z are the young people who are cool and classy and they eat KFC after protests. No. Gen Z is everyone. Gen Z is all of you that are suffering through that generation with no jobs, nothing to do. Maisha yenu ni magumu sana. In fact, you have social media pressure. You people, the pressure you are giving each other is insane. There's young people buying cars, houses, And of course the pressure is checking in, but more importantly, fundamentally, you guys went to school, you're trying to make a living. It is not fair what the state is doing. And I know Kenya is working very hard to send all of you abroad. Would you rather have jobs in Kenya? Do you create employment in your own country or elsewhere? So you start first here before you export Kenyans. Because this is their heritage, I saw a young person on TV recently ask the president, why don't you go and become the president of USA, since you're very keen on telling young people you've created jobs for them in the Gulf and wherever. Now, these jobs in the Gulf, it's you become a maid, you become a what. We're not even telling young people about when you go with your papers there, they're not recognized. Are you aware? Some of these countries, you go with your papers, you have to go through the education system afresh. We know the level of racism happening in the world. Honestly speaking, you cannot tell Africans to leave their homeland and go and get jobs elsewhere as a president. Right? Now, in terms of the future of democracy in Africa, we have to embrace technology. We have to leverage on technology to enhance transparency, security, and efficiency in electoral processes. Now, Youth engagement is something that is happening. The youth are engaging themselves. In fact, the youth are engaging us. So we thank you for that. Regional and international cooperation. We pray that we keep having these conversations as a region, as East Africa, and of course as the larger part of Africa. We need to have strengthen electoral laws and institutions, promote civic education and voter engagement. I saw a number of hands in terms of who is interested in vying for, not vying, even vying is okay anyway. Yeah, in voting. I think that is important. We must also be willing to inject ourselves into these spaces where we get elected, right? And we must, the cost of elections is very high. I think that's something we also have to discuss. Why? This is why the appetite is so high. My brother from Uganda said it's the politicians' appetite for elections. Look at our president. They started campaigning. In Kenya, there's an official electoral campaign period. But no one will follow the law. They start immediately after they get into office. Why? Why? You know? Look at, did you know that our ballot paper has more security features than the legal tender? Did you know that? Our money has less security features than a vote, a ballot paper. It's so expensive. Kenya has one of the most expensive elections unnecessarily. And guess what? These expensive elections feed a lot of people because the ecosystem, ni watu wanafanya biashara, si ndio? Yes. There's a time kulikuwa na mlolongo, watu wanapanga line na wanapiga kura. What happened? It's because each time we mistrust each other, we run, we change the law, we introduce more things. Look, we have 93 parties. What are we doing with 93 parties? This has become the most lucrative job in Kenya. Every person wants to become a politician so that they go in and they loot. Anyway, so I'm almost finishing. We must address underlying socioeconomic issues. Finance bill, we were too busy in Kenya here with protesting for Juang. Finance bill has been passed. Yeah? But these are still conversations we can have in conventional and unconventional spaces. In terms of institutional reforms, I've mentioned IBC can ensure it has a level of independence, impartiality, adequate resources for their work. We must strengthen parliamentary oversight. Unfortunately, in Kenya and many East African countries, parliaments, parliamentarians are also politicians. They're rubber stamps for the head of state, right? And then you can see what is happening in Kenya, where there's no opposition. In fact, the person that was fired from deputy president has become the official opposition. Yeah, well, we continue, we move. Yeah, we must strengthen the media. We saw recently how the media was gagged, I think, during the protest, just so that they do not report things as they are. And then we need media literacy programs. Media literacy is very, very important to promote critical thinking so that, fact-checking skills can become part and parcel of Kenyans. Mtu akisema urongo, you fact-check very, very quickly. I think America is very good at that. Yeah? And then in terms of inclusive and responsive governance, I was thinking maybe it's time we start talking about, we talk about trade and investment in the region, but unless we have common legislation, how is that going to happen? Because we cannot have joint trade and say we are open for trade as East Africa community, but the laws in Kenya and Tanzania are fundamentally different in terms of the trade and investment. So that's an example. So even in terms of whether we have young parliamentarians or whatever is happening in the region, for us to move in tandem so that we don't have one country that is ahead and the other one's another country that does. I mean, Tanzania, if someone walks with the constitution, my brother in the morning was saying, people can ask you, what do you have against the state? Just because someone sees you with the constitution, you know? So this is not where we need to be as a continent. I apologize if I have depressed you, but this is where we are. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Some of us might need to see therapists after this. And as Brenda, you are speaking, I was reminded when you said that, you see, democracies must be centered. A democracy that is not centered does not center economic empowerment, then it really is a failed democracy. And when you are talking about capture now by the few, I was reminded of a quote by Ayn Rand, where he says, when you see that in order to produce, you need to obtain permission from men who produce nothing. When you see that money is flowing to those who deal, not in goods, but in favors. When you see that men get richer by graft and by pull than by work, and your laws don't protect you against them, but protect them against you. When you see corruption being rewarded and honesty becoming a self-sacrifice, you may know that your society is truly doomed. So really, that is a very glim picture. And Tito, as we now go into this, the region has been characterized with suppression and manipulation of those that speak out. As you give us your perspectives, what is the role of civic courage? Having paid the price yourself, what is the role of civic courage in the movement? And what will you tell us? How will you encourage us? Over to you, Tito.
Asante sana, David. But also, asante sana, the conveners of this important symposia, for having us. You know, I was positively defeated by the clarity of thoughts from my colleagues. And I almost sent a text to David that, you know, can I just thank the audience for listening to yeah, because they spoke to some of the issues of commonality that we all agree to. But again, I'm going to, I think my ancestors will thoroughly guide me so that I'm not being repetitive and boring. But also I hope no one is sleeping because, colleagues, lunch will come. so no one should ever sleep. Yeah. Well, for David, regular, fair and equitable, transparent electoral processes. So I would say that in Tanzania we have the first regular. We are very good at that, and we have been known for being an island of peace. Just because we vote and then we go home. No electoral disputes, no contestations, just because they managed to cow us into silence. And whenever we are crying in Swahili. So the rest of the continent would be thinking that maybe they are celebrating the you know. So it's a very challenging context. But again, my sister alluded to the fact that some of our colleagues were mistreated in Tanzania. Very unfortunate. It's a very regrettable occurrence. And I myself extended an apology to them because we happened to work together. But however, it was also a blessing in disguise that now Tanzania is being uncovered in terms of the extent of atrocities that have been occurring in our country without checks. To my understanding is that not only Samia Suluhu Hassan, but also Magufuli and their former, they have exhausted the list of crimes against humanity. Not only rape, enforced disappearance, abduction, torture, extrajudicial killings. They have exhausted. And we probably might have an ICC candidate in the future if all goes well. So it was a blessing in disguise, and we thank the continent for rallying behind us. Reflecting on the topic briefly, we have had regular elections, and I'm going to give you a bit of statistics. So when Magufuli took power in 2015, he promised to get rid of the opposition and civil society. My brother Frugens alluded to the fact that there's a paralyzed state of affairs in Tanzania. Civil society, we are sleeping, journalists, HRDs and stuff. So in 2019, they won the local government election at a landslide, unprecedented 98-99. In 2020, the presidency was won on a landslide, but also our parliament was turned into an extended part caucus with almost close to 98% of not so honorable members of parliament from 2020 up to date. So we have had a dysfunctional state of affairs in Tanzania. Then last year in 2024, they won the local government election colorful. You know, you'd have an 98% margin of win. But again, in 2024, what they did, the voter registration was done manually. So you go to a post, register your name, they don't verify your residence. So the possibility that I would register at Kilimani and then go register in Kileleshwa and go register in Mombasa, it was high. There was no computerized system of storing this data, which is why, again, they won on a landslide. We have an election this year, and then we don't expect anything new, which is why I recently asked the question that what is it that will happen after the 2025 October general election? To Micah's question that who is willing to vote, I said, no, I'm not willing to vote. I'm not going to give you an opportunity to steal my vote. I would rather stay at home with it. One bishop in Tanzania is now known famously for saying that namna pekee ya kulinda kura yako ni kubaki nayo nyumbani. So the only way to protect your vote is just remain with it at home. Don't put it in the ballot, it will be stolen. And then there's this famous movement in Tanzania now, no reforms, no election. So people are trying to mobilize against electoral malpractice, which is maybe to your question, David, that what is it that we have that the politicians want? Of course, maybe politicians is general. We might have political aspirations in this building. The ruling elites want. They want your vote. They want your vote for the purpose of creating legitimacy. So are we in a position to deny them political legitimacy? If we are in a village or in a constituency, we are 2 million. If we say that we are not going to vote and we are guarding each other against going to legitimize the system, who are they going to lead? So this is a question to us. Are we willing to say no, or are we willing to say no to enabling repression and oppressive regimes? And what is it that will fall afterwards? Again, also, I have a few highlights of probably things to consider. One is that we can shape institutions, especially institutions of democracy, through usage. We shouldn't give up on the court, on the judiciary. And I speak this with so much admiration to the Kenyan judiciary. I think in the past 1 week, during the maandamano, the previous maandamano, the order to ban live coverage of the protest was suspended in no time. So people went to court. So they are shaping the institutions of democracy. They are shaping the culture of democracy and human rights. But also, I think 2 days ago, Justice Chacha Mwita, and we are going to claim this justice. He's a Tanzanian. Justice Chacha Mwita. I come from this north side of Tanzania, Mara. So we share the names, the Kuria, the Luo, Badamejita. So he was asking the DCI that I need the body of a person you arrested. Bring the body. Produce the body. So the lawyers were in court shaping the culture of democracy. So sometimes we have good judges, and then we tend to say, the amount of disappointment I've seen in this court, I'm retaliating. I'm going to do farming in my village. So we in the movement, we have to remain consistent and shape our culture of democracy through usage of institutions, especially the judiciary. Because our shared understanding is that the executive can do anything with the parliament, but at least there's a little bit of optimism in the judiciary. The parliament in Tanzania, in Uganda, in Kenya, I think they're as good as speaking the same language. Museveni did whatever maneuver to extend term limit, to remove age, whatever, through the parliament. Magufuli passed a lot of orders through the parliament that was an extended party caucus. You remember what happened last year with the impeachment. It was a drama from the lower to the upper, house. Yeah, so I think we must utilize the available opportunities, especially the judiciary. Yeah, but also, however disappointing it might be, sometimes we wake up to success stories. My brother Masawe alluded to the ruling we had past 2 weeks. The judiciary of Tanzania annulled a law that Magufuli had enacted, to extend immunity to top government officials against prosecution, and also limit public interest litigation. We were defeated in the High Court. We went back home. We did our assignments, luckily with the help of senior counsels like Professor Issa Shivji. We went back to court. And then we woke up to some success story. It was jovial, a moment of, a celebration that we are probably relighting our chapter of public interest litigation. Yes, so we have got to create a culture of democracy. But also we should look at reforms as a holistic discourse that we need to pursue. It is a game of intersectionality. This institution checking this, that institution supporting this institution. I'm not going to say a lot on that in the interest of time, but just look at these institutions. The lawmaking process, how is it complementing the lawmaking house? How is it complementing the judiciary? Where do we people find refuge in times of government excesses? Where should we run to? The entire regulatory process, and also we should look at the people within the institutions. Someone said a point around the literate. I think it was yesterday I was discussing with Justice and Mzee Arnold Sunga that what should be the minimum level of education for a parliamentarian. But again, if we come among ourselves, we would ask a question: who is willing to be a parliamentarian? I saw a very interesting discussion from Kenyan Gen Zs that, guys, the EBC is going to announce the positions of commissioners or members, something like that. Yeah, people are saying we need a Gen Z in that institution. So instead of laying back and let things happen by themselves, we have got to participate, to Micah's point. And as I finish, I also want to do a highlight of what are we lacking. We are lacking consistency. We're lacking consistency. We are civil society, so we have to treat the movement as a society. We are not supposed to treat a movement as a donor-oriented program that we do within a year and then phase it out. We are getting it wrong in terms of thinking that without money we cannot do anything. We can still chat on Kahawa Talks, chat in the village, chat in the matatus, chat everywhere. That this is undesirable. We need this. We need to move from here. So we have got to be consistent in terms of our demands. I don't know how far the one-term movement is going to. I don't know. Now it's half-term, so I don't know to what extent we can have these conversations around half-term, one-term. I don't know how far the no reforms, no election chants in Tanzania are going. I don't know. But at least we have got to be consistent with the end goal, that we need to register a certain fundamental outcome that will be sustainable and sustain the movement. David, I'm finishing, because I see you. I see you. But also, we have to speak, we have to be true to ourselves. I loved what my sister said. She was speaking like a dada speaking to the Gen Z. You Gen Zs, if I don't dress properly, you shouldn't ridicule me, don't delegitimize me. I'm in the movement. I just didn't have a proper outfit. But also among ourselves, there's a sad reality that we have got to communicate to each other. We have disruptive forces in the movement. Disruptive forces in the movement. We have people who are here to collect money and leave. And it's very painful to come to the realization that this person has been a double agent, selling information, selling strategies. We are not concealing anything in the first place. We are not concealing it because we are not criminals. We are not criminals organizations, but we are trying to be a bit more organized. So why are we disrupting our maandamano that is planned to occur in Mombasa next week, why are you donating this information to the establishment? They will start, erecting means of fear, inflicting fear, coming out. I don't like this guy, this CS who came out authorizing the police to shoot and kill. But these are tactics of creating fear amongst the populace. Because, our courage differs. I might be courageous enough to say, I will still go to protest, it's my right. But there's a ton of people who would be set down, the parents would set them down and tell them, you know what, you are all that we have in this house. And yeah, so disruptive forces and also accountability. How do we use the money intended for the movement? We have got to be a bit more open to each other and speak truth to power, even amongst each other. I think we can do more and better on that instead of trying to keep whatever resources we have or whatever resources we think, this one for 2 years I need to relate fairly to Mike so that he can keep inviting me in conferences, give me per diem. So if someone is corrupt or if someone is disrupting the movement, we have got to tell them. We have got to tell them. And as I finish, going forward, we have got to maximize our impact by rallying, creating coalitions. What are you doing? What lessons do I have to learn from you? And what is it that I've been doing that you're not doing? And what lessons can you deduce from mine? We also have to utilize the numbers. I love the Siri ni kitu gani? Siri ni numbers. To think of it and to try to break it down. It gives a lot of meaning and impact at a personal level. If I'm alone, I'll be defeated. But if we are 1,000, And we should also stop focusing on events. I alluded to this earlier. Where is the no reforms, no election going? Can we be a little bit more consistent and sustainable in that? And lastly, we should be a bit more systemic and provide alternatives that speak to people's reality. I don't know a leader who called the Gen Zs on the previous Maandamano, but I could see people on Twitter Spaces, at least more than one Twitter Spaces, will dress like this. If you see a gun, do this. So people felt like this movement resonates with their day-to-day lives. So we have got to give them ownership, such that once I retire from the movement, if I say I'm going back to I've had enough of this movement. Lastly, I think I've said more lastly. I've got to make the movement fashionable. The movement has to be stylistic. It shouldn't be old school. People should love it. I remember last year, I was with some Kenyan colleagues somewhere when the first historical Maandamano happened. I could see everyone associating to the Maandamano because it was fashionable. We Kenyans, Even the people have known to be very quiet and very conservative. The Maandamano. It is just because of the impact and also the fact that it was fashionable, it was popular, the message was crystal clear, people knew what they wanted, they had an ultimatum of the needs. Yeah, David, I'm sorry I added 2 more minutes, I think, but apologies, and colleagues, thanks for listening.
Tito is a son of a preacher. So they start with lastly, finally, as I conclude. But thank you, Tito, for those perspectives. And thank you for reminding us to be consistent. And I think your call that there's regional, you can see cross-border collaboration between governments to ensure that the people are oppressed. Then people must also come together and ensure that that they hold these governments accountable. Because when you have Ugandans being taken from Kenya and taken back to Uganda, the same thing with Kenyans being taken from Tanzania and being tortured and being thrown in borders, then that tells you that the people must also come together. Tito, thank you for reminding us of retaliate. Amaje? Retaliate. I think I'll open this discussion to the floor. So I see Dr. Justice's hand is up. I see Jerry's hand is up. Anne is up. And then Charles is up. And there's the final one here. So we'll... Now, leader, when you put your hand up as the last one, what am I supposed to do? All right.
Thanks, David. And thank you, colleagues, for, I think, very insightful views on how we can make elections truly free, fair, and credible. To some extent, I envy you because we only got 6 minutes to talk. You got more. Okay, she's not listening. Okay, and I think what you said and what was said in the previous session sort of reminded me of where I wanted to go with my presentation yesterday. That I think we need to understand, as we grapple with this question, how do we make elections truly fair and credible? We need to understand something. And my view is we are living in an age across, I think, the world, not just in Africa, in an age of competitive authoritarianism with hegemonic flavor. But let me just quickly break that down. So competitive authoritarianism is a form of dictatorship which emerged, I think, in the late 90s, where dictators began to create a semblance of democratic rule. But under the cover of that semblance of democratic rule are vicious autocratic practices. So, for example, there will be a constitution that guarantees freedoms, all sorts of freedoms. But then those who express views that are dissenting are then criminally charged with all sorts of things which on paper look legitimate, but the motive for the criminal charges is basically to suppress legitimate political activity. So that's competitive authoritarianism. Now, there are 3 zones which competitive authoritarianist regime target. And as we retaliate or as we program around how to make elections truly free, fair, and credible, we need to pay attention to those 3 or rather 4 zones. So the first is media. So as you talked about getting involved, to what extent are we getting involved in the media sector? I don't mean to say we must all become journalists and broadcasters, but I mean that we need to invest in creating platforms for the conscious journalist to operate and propagate the message. Because competitive authoritarianists seek to control the media narrative. The second is lawmaking. To what extent are we participating in lawmaking? Because competitive authoritarianists seek to control or manipulate lawmaking in order to create laws that basically protect or underpin their hegemonic power, which is why I think one of you said, I think it was in a poetic way, you said they make laws to protect themselves and not us, right? So we need to challenge them in that zone. The last zone is the zone that I'm passionate about, is the judiciary. So competitive authoritarianists do not necessarily get rid of the judiciary, except I think in Tanzania, where you have limitations around challenging the results of presidential elections. You say the law says you can't. But across Africa, you can challenge the results of presidential elections in most cases. But competitive authoritarianists will find subtle ways of managing the judiciary. So they will create what looks formally like an independent judiciary, but they will then find ways to manage that. So we also need to get involved in that zone beyond just litigating. I hear your point about we need to litigate, we need to litigate strategically. But we need to think more creatively around how do we actually sensitize our judges for them to be able to understand the environment and the context within which they operate. You will be surprised that a lot of them, because they are far removed from society, they actually don't understand the sophistication with which competitive dictators operate and seek to manipulate the judiciary. So are we creating platforms to engage with the judges, to sensitize them? So I wish next time when we meet in a forum like this one, you then include the judges so that they can hear these conversations, but also so that you can engage with them. So in summary, David, I'm saying there are 3 zones which competitive authoritarianists operate in order to manipulate elections. Because remember, there must be a semblance of competition, but the competition must be rigged in such a way that it is even difficult to prove. So they do so by manipulating the media, they do so by manipulating the lawmaking process, and they do so by manipulating the judiciary. And we need to challenge them systematically in those 3 zones. Thank you.
Wow. Dr. Justice is a teacher. So thank you for that intervention. We'll have Anne.
Thank you to the panel. Maybe allow me to start by debunking. As an election practitioner, there is no free and fair elections. That is a fallacy. Back to my point, and also to appreciate that Africa, we've come a long way. When it was almost impossible for regimes to hold elections, to now every regime is falling over each other to conduct elections. But now the quality of that election is what we are trying to interrogate. My brother spoke about Cameroon. I've been able to observe that election. One of the simplest electoral system they have, but see where they are with the dictator. Ruth, with our EMB, beautiful elections, we spend billions of shillings to conduct an election. But what happens? Kenyans come out in large numbers to vote. But who announces the winner of the election? It is the courts, the Supreme Court. And this brings me to the point where Tito was saying that we should capacitate the judiciary. But on the other side, where it is a 5-7 bench that will determine where the country goes in the next 5 years, and my sister here was asking, who puts the judiciary in check in terms of when they go rogue, for example? Looking at the electoral system in Rwanda, having observed that election, very possible to get 99.9% because of how the electoral system is skewed. So we can sit here, talk about how different jurisdictions are conducting the electoral system in a different way. But maybe should we pause and ask ourselves, when our ancestors were ruling, they never used to have elections, but governance was somehow actualized. So how do we Africanize the African elections to our own context? Because, as it were, democracy is a new concept in Africa. So how do we look further and say the elections that we need in our countries, the elections that we need in our jurisdictions are the ones that cut across? Look at Kenya. We did an election in 2022. And the person we were supposed to take to Bondo is now not in government, but he sits in cabinet. And there was that joke, Kenya is the only is the only East African country, the opposition leader is not in prison. So what is it? Why we spend so many billions? Then after elections, we have the handshake, we have the broad-based, which is now the blood-based, and God knows what next.
Charles behind you, and then there, and then leader.
Thank you, Thuku, and thank you to the panelists. My name is Charles Jaika, a digital rights expert at ICJ Kenya. So, starting from digital, that takes us to all everything that is transpiring within the electoral transformation systems. And echoing at our brother Tito, shaping the culture of Democrats, my question, not question per se, but Ruth, our friend, can elude on that as well. So amongst IBC pre-election phases is procurement and testing of electoral technologies. In Raila Odinga 2017, there was a failure, a total failure of electoral technology systems. In Raila Odinga versus IBC 2022, I remember there was an issue regarding the, I think, Vietnamese guys who were caught at the JKIA, Kamango. They were trying to smuggle some technology stuff into the country, procured by IBC. So those are some of the things that we are looking at here. So I have had Ruth reiterating on this. Ruth, sorry, allow me to clobber. I've had Ruth reiterating on this, that you are unsure about us maybe checking after the technology laws. And recently we had Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act, which not only feeds on its own toes, but also feeds on its own children. That means that if Ruth today wants to become a Chief Justice in 2040, the technology will bring a video of Ruth in since 2017. I mean back then. I hope you're understanding my point. So coming back to the digital rights issue, like for example, let me just reiterate on a recent case that ICJ is the main party to the case. ICJ has filed a case in court regarding internet shutdown. Internet shutdown has been a major thing in the country. You will find out that whenever we are heading towards elections, the internet will be shut down. That is with the orders from the government. And during protest periods, internet shutdown has happened here in the country. But you know what? People have become more clever. And what is happening is that nowadays you do not need the country to prove that internet will shut down. We'll go direct to IODA, we'll go direct to UNI, the people who own the internet. And they will unleash what is happening with the internet here in the country. So that is the major system. So digital rights has become democracy in our country. Internet is nowadays a right. You can imagine yourselves without the internet within an hour or even within 10 minutes, how short will everything be? So pointing out to what has been said is that technology, for purposes of my own accountability as a patriotic citizen, is that whatever happens in the IBC can also happen outside the IBC. In as much as our systems, electoral systems, are extremely expensive, they can also be tallied from the outside. So either way, there shouldn't be no restrictions regarding to what the electoral system is bringing to us. However, even with the restrictions, they will have to come up with something that is very vocal to the people. For example, we do not, I mean, as a patriotic citizen, where is the mistake of a Gen Z an electoral system which is similar to what is happening with the media and the IBC. So that is
Hello?
I mean, that is what happens exactly in the digital space. And maybe you can reiterate on that, because preparation of the pre-election phases regarding the technology, procurement of this testing systems is part of what you guys do. So possibly if you can elucidate on the same, just to expound to the team that is a democracy process that is needed by everyone, for the people, by the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaika. I think we'll have Njeri. And for the team that is yet to speak, let's keep it short, and then we are coming to you, Shukri.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think I had more comments, but I will try to stick to the ones that are related directly to elections, although all of the others also came up. I felt a bit of pessimism in some of the presentations there. And of course, you know, as an activist, you have to be constantly, what? What is the other word? Optimistic, because if you are not, then the battle is lost. You don't even have to come out of your house, even to go to work. So I felt a bit of that, and I want to just maybe give comments that may encourage us not to come from here depressed. So I want to start with the IBC budget. I hear a lamentation. Why are we lamenting? You know, IBC is one of the Chapter 15 institutions in Kenya. And for those who are not Kenyans, Chapter 15 institutions are very, very specific in the Constitution. They are supposed to protect the sovereignty of the people, ensure adherence to democratic values and principles by all state organs, promote constitutionalism. They must be independent, and they are subject only to the Constitution and the laws of Kenya. So when an IEBC, a Kenya National Human Rights Commission, an IPOA, all these institutions are complaining, it is because they don't understand their mandate within the Constitution of Kenya. Because they have the courts. You can go to court and demand, even the judiciary should not be expecting a salary, let me call it that, a salary from the executive. They should by now already have, since the Constitution came in power in 2010, by today they should already have their own money regulated, because they are supposed to be directly funded, not through the executive. So what am I trying to say? That the Chapter 15 institutions, including the IEBC, are letting Kenya down. And it is not us who should be, and it should not be a lamentation. It should be a proactive action demanding that money comes. Otherwise, you quit office. What are you doing there? You are supposed to be independent. You know, we are too happy. Somebody yesterday talked about professionalism of chairing this. Today you are in Kenya National Human Rights Commission. Tomorrow you are in IBC. Another day you are somewhere else. Quit those jobs and create your own jobs, because you are letting down the nation. If you are holding a position and you are in an office that is not funded at all, and yesterday I also heard the East Africa Law Society saying they can't sit. They can't sit because they have no court. The court has no funds. What is this we are dealing with? Okay, it doesn't fall under the mandate of the Kenya Constitution, but it falls under some mandate. Yes. It falls under some mandate. Who is supposed to fund them? Why are they just not there then? Quit. Go back to your offices and say the court has refused to work. Report it to the East Africans that we can no longer have this court because it is no longer funded. Okay, sorry. That was just IBC budget and Chapter 15 institutions. The other one is for Tanzanians, Ugandans, and others. No reforms, no elections. We tried this in Kenya. We didn't have the new constitution. If we had the benefit of the new constitution then, maybe it would have worked for us. No reform, no elections. Moi the first time got 36.35% votes. He still went in 1992. Because the opposition, part of it was voted not willingly and unwillingly. There was confusion around but they still had over 60% of the votes. but they could not. Moi still came back because he, with 36%, he was still the highest candidate. Then in 1997, he was on 40%. 40 point something percent. He was still the highest candidate. So our laws, and I'm hearing people saying Kenya has too much, especially around elections, they are based on our experience. The 50+1 is based on that experience, that there should never be a president in Kenya who gets 36.5, while our 36.35, while the opposition has 65%, and that person with 36 is the one ruling. It is based, our laws are based on our experience. Our constitution is based on our experience. So let us not lament, first of all, that, you know, we have too much law around the elections. We need to have that much, because if we don't, we will even be worse off than we have been in the past years. So no reforms, no elections. Without the safeguards of a constitution like the one we have in Kenya, I'm just saying to the Tanzanians and to the Ugandans, the elections will go on, and of course, as you have said, over and over, a majority. You know, in Tanzania is very different from the rest of the African country, of the East Africa countries, because you still have CCM in power, and it gets overwhelming majority. Kenya, that is over. KANU lost. KANU cannot not even show its face in public anymore as a dynamic party. It's still there as one of the 93 parties, but it is not a dynamic party. You need to get to that state where a party that's not delivering for the people becomes a KANU in Kenya. And then there was something else about, I need to just raise this because we keep mentioning it, the habeas corpus law. You know, in Kenya, we changed also with the new constitution. You cannot hold a person for more than 24 hours unless it is unless it's a murder case. But we are having people being held for weeks. And again, I challenge the legal fraternity in this country. Why? Why are those bodies not being produced in court? What are we waiting for? We are waiting for a dead body to come and give us instructions? No, no, no. We have to be more proactive. We have to really not wait to be sent to court. We should appear in court and demand, because we have that right that wasn't there before. Anyone can actually go to court in Kenya today. And then, of course, 14 days is for murder cases. Even if you are a murderer and you haven't been brought, they haven't found evidence, it means they are torturing you, and they are torturing you. And again, Kenya Constitution is against torture. So it means once you are held over 24 hours, unfortunately, Albert Ojwang was held just within that period and was already killed through torture. So you can imagine what is happening to somebody who is held over 24 hours. So for me, no lamentation, but action, action, action. If we can't act, and we have all this knowledge, all these degrees, all these opportunities, what are we doing with them? And as somebody was saying about the Gen Z being seen, the Gen Z separating themselves from the, from maybe my social justice people from Mathare, from Korogosho and others, drop that hat. We need to be together. We need to be united as a nation. And if we are not, we can't be united as a region. So we need, first of all, and I said yesterday, Kenya is already a few steps ahead, like our runners. We're already a few steps ahead. So we cannot go back. We have to keep ahead so that the others can follow, and then we have a united East Africa. We cannot have a united East Africa if Kenyans are failing. So I'm just challenging us. We cannot afford to lament. We cannot afford to lament. We have opportunity to act and create and move. So please, let's move.
Thank you, Jerry.
You know, when you listen to Jerry speak, you can tell of the anger, which is okay. Now, it is easy for us to batter IEBC, and I don't envy Ruth by any chance. I can tell you, when you look at you, we are like, hey, you have work. But anyway, I've been reflecting a lot about the role of IEBC, and I like the point you made that actually you don't really have credible elections. And it's true. The aspect of the word independent, I don't think the framers of the Constitution had really thought keenly or about those institutions. Because provided we don't have proper architecture in terms of financing, then independence is subject to the executive. And that's what we are struggling with. So for many of us, I think, we need to start thinking of how to ensure that from the funding bit, we have independence. Because provided IBC relies on the executive majorly, because we know our budget making process. We cannot pretend. That is where the problem is. So provided we don't figure out that funding bit, that aspect of independence is just hogwash, and we just be pretending, right? Secondly, I've also been thinking, and this is to Ruth, one of the realities is when you read the Kregler's recommendations, and I'm assuming IBC is very keen on this, the findings that were made post-2007 elections are actually what we are seeing today. That's a fact. So provided we are not well prepared for the next election, and he talked about 2 years, then we're actually sitting ducks. Provided we don't have our house in order as early as now, wherever we are with the IBC, whatever the dreams we have and the ambitions and everything else we are discussing here is purely hogwash. So it will be important for us to really ask ourselves, are we even ready for the next election as early as now? Are we? Are we here busy saying, oh, Gen Zs are busy demonstrating, so what happens in 2027? If provided we don't still have a commission as early as now, if still we are discussing the funding as early as now, what are we? And I can tell Jerry is talking about these people can go to court, can fight for it. Where? Do we have the structure? So it's a worrying situation because if you review Article 81, Article 38, Article 34, all these beautiful articles in the Constitution, they all rely on proper structure, which is what we are struggling with.
Hello. Is it on? I don't think so. Really? Hello? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Well, again, thank you for the wonderful panel. I'm just piggybacking on Jerry's intervention about the call to optimism. I really don't have a question. I would just like to invite you to take a risk. And by that I mean, if not elections, then what? Because it is clear that the elections as they stand in the continent today are more mementos of our mistrust than what they were intended to be, which is a method to manage the constantly emergent difference and disagreement that is a society. We cannot get rid of disagreement for social life to be social life. Identity, homogeneity, and constancy are actually the currencies of dictators. They want identity, they want constancy, they want constant agreement. So if elections are a method to manage the ever-emergent disagreement, I guess what I'm trying to say is, feel free to share with us in this safe space another method to manage that difference that is society. And in this just final note, I'm taking my cue from Frantz Fanon in The Wretched of the Earth. Because in the closing of chapter 4, where he is criticizing this idea of culture being, like a mummified memory of the past, he says that the culture of a nation is a constantly emergent substance. So I think Fanon is the one working with this tradition of substance, the one that elaborates on this idea of substantive democracy that is most relevant to us. Because he's celebrating that substance that is in constant movement, not the mummified fragments of the past, which is something that electoral democracy perhaps is trying to preserve. So, to sum it up, if not elections, then what? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Shukri, and then
Thank you, Zuku. As part of the communications team, I realize that I have a microphone here. So I will, let me just use it. So as I was sitting here, I thought of, you'll remember in the early 2000s, there was a coalition of the willing, Americans, UK, and some European countries. They invaded Iraq, saying that there were WMDs there. Now to link that thought to what I am about to ask, we are seeing an unholy alliance amongst the heads of state in East Africa when it comes to clamping down on the civic space. Is it fair to assume that this unholy alliance by these heads of state can also impact elections in our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Shukri.
Good afternoon, and thanks for the panel. I may have missed a few things when I walked out, but I have just a couple of things to ask or talk about. One, just listening to all of us, don't you think we are falling into the stereotype of what politics is? I like when you say 25,000 politicians among 55,000 Kenyans. What is politics? I think if we decided to define politics differently, we will be able to change the narrative about politics, but that's a question I was just asking. The other part is politics elections? Because if you listen to all of us, we have focused on elections, but is politics just about elections? What more? Because then that constricts our engagement and interaction in that particular space. I'm happy with what Njeria said about our laws are informed by our experiences. We have electrical injustices that have not been addressed in this country. And because we have tried many other mechanisms, actually Kenya has tried many mechanisms. Let me give an example. How many know Gor Mahia? No Gor Mahia. Who do you relate Gor Mahia with? How many know AFC Leopards? Yes. With whom do you associate AFC Leopards? How many know Mavoko Bombers? Who do you associate that with? So what we have done is, even good social spaces where we'll have had beautiful conversations, we have ethnicized those spaces. And so is it possible that we can expand that conversation and say, these laws that we have are informed by experiences, yes, but we have failed all other aspects. The social aspects have failed, the economic aspects have failed, and therefore we have resorted to law. But then we need to ask, what culture do we have around law? Then my last thing will be, what do we do with the middle class? How many middle class go for mandamanos? How many of us go to mandamanos? Are we middle class? Who is not? Okay, who is not a middle class here? Okay. Do you realize, and this I would like us to address, do you realize that the people keeping authoritarianism in power are middle class? We know that. They're the ones who do proposals. They're the ones who remember they have mortgages. They're the ones who remember that their car will be stoned. How do we deal with middle class when we are going to deal with this issue? Thank you.
So that I don't look like a bad moderator, with military precision, I'll give each of you 2 minutes. There are conversations we'll have at lunch. So 2 minutes to just give us your final word and maybe an intervention. Ruth, you can start.
Mike says I have a lot of questions, but I think I only had one. The rest, I believe, were conversations that we need to move forward with. And just for clarification, remember I said I'm a what? I'm an ICJ member. I'm not here on behalf of IBC. So, but what I'll just clarify, based on the information that comes, that I have, is that procurement of election materials is done pursuant to the Public Procurement Act and the Disposal Act, because of 2 minutes in Mepewa. So when that happens, there is sufficient, the aspect of procurement is done within that particular law. So when you ask about Camargo and the Vietnamese, I hear where you're coming from, but just to be clear, I think the former commission actually gave a statement of what that was all about. And the Supreme Court also had an interpretation of the aspect of the Camargo issue, because the Vietnamese and the Camargo are totally different. The aspect of Camargo was the issue of the register, because when they were printing the register, it was him who had the details because it was a company that was hired to come up with the register. So when they were taking photos at the polling station, that was the name that was coming out. But moving forward, that should not be a thing that we are doing. The IBC will be using its name, not the name of the procuring institution, because then it creates doubt, then mistrust, and then those other things. On the aspect of Kriegler recommendations, the Chebukati team came in January 17, 2017, and they only had how many months to prepare for the election? Almost 7. And they did the best that they did. Now, if we get commissioners now, we will have sufficient time for training, policies, and strategy. And we pray that next week we will be probably getting a favorable decision. Then again, sub judice rule, please forgive me. The other, I think, the aspect of funding, let me clarify. What I'm saying is not that we are not funded. What I'm saying is that we are funded, but not in the manner that would have our own resources that are directly deposited into our account for us to manage within a financial year. So it comes in tranches of quarters, right? So that is the challenge that the EMB of this country usually faces. As we speak, they've rolled out the election budget and some of the things that need to, for purposes of planning for 2027. But it is still a challenge. And when I speak about over legislation, I'm not talking about the salient laws that we have, the aspect of secret voting by secret ballot, etc. I'm talking about legislating aspects of, for example, a polling station has 700. That is a law. But the fact that we have implemented the KIMS in our country, we can actually, verify or identify 1,000 voters in a polling station. But the IBC cannot do that. We cannot expand the 700 to 1,000 because it is in statute. So what we want is a possibility for the commission to be given the leeway, be given a modus in which they can, regulate that by themselves. But then again, maybe it's because of history, and maybe it's because of that. So moving forward, we have made certain proposals for change in the Elections Act for purposes of ensuring that there is efficient and effective delivery of elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. Michael?
So thank you. To those of you who read the Bible or attempt to, somewhere in Corinthians, and I think they say the greatest of all is love. I want to say that the greatest for all this should be hope in this movement. The last thing they should steal from you is hope, because without the hope, we will fear to do whatever we are doing. So for me, the greatest in all this is that we should be hopeful. And yesterday I talked to Tito, and I've been with Tito in the same class for almost a year, and said that my wish is that I am alive when I see change in my country. Because then I don't want to only be in history books, but I should be present when there is a new president in my country, even if it means me. And the other one is, yes, Eric, those are very good perceptions on we need to discuss. And the elections, I think, for me, is that it's because the politicians is the highest currency for their next bread. So that's why everyone wants to focus on elections. Yet actually politics is just the distribution of resources. And how do we do that is also the people we put in charge are supposed to do that, but they're not doing that. I agree with you, my brother from WITS. This is a conversation we need to have again after here. If not elections, what else can we have that can distribute resources evenly? And I think that's a conversation that we need to have. At African level, they said this democracy is a Western thing. So they have the African Charter on Democracy, Governance and Elections. But how many people have ratified? there are few that have ratified. The East African Protocol on Good Governance and Elections, it has never seen light of day. And we're talking about, democracy for Africa, democracy for East Africa. They think, they say it's a Western concept, so we need to have that conversation. These guys will not have it because they have found a currency that pushes them to get our money. Lastly, 4 things. Let's get the army out of politics. In my country, the army has 10 seats in parliament. 10 seats in parliament. We need to get the army out of elections because we have bloody elections. I have documented we have over 400 people who have died because of elections. Like, why would you die because of elections? Number 2, let's continue documenting. Going to court is another way of documenting things people are doing and putting it in public eyes. Lastly, is that let us continue in solidarity in whatever form. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the reflections and the comments. I think they're all welcome. On cross-border collaborations by oppressive regimes, I think this is something very alarming. And of course, a question was asked as to whether the cross-border collaborations by our oppressive regimes has the potential to affect elections. The answer is yes. Yeah. In terms of, we've talked about the laws in the country, and I think the comment about elections being over-legislated, LGR, the Electoral Law and Governance Institute for Africa, works very closely with the Electoral Commission, with the judiciary. We actually have trained the judiciary. We develop a judiciary training curriculum. We trained the Supreme Court of Kenya on elections. Elections is an animal that not necessarily someone went to school to learn about. So the judiciary, with their practice, have to understand elections deeply. We take them through electoral laws. We look at electoral disputes. We look at electoral dispute resolution. In the last election, we were able to aid a quasi-judicial body called the Political Parties Dispute Tribunal to decentralize its services across Kenya. Many years ago, before the last election in 2022, there was only one pre-election dispute court in Nairobi, where if you have a pre-election dispute, all political parties across the country would have to travel to Nairobi to look for justice around pre-election disputes. Of course, there's internal political party dispute resolution mechanisms. However, internally, of course, some political parties are unfair to their members, so they run to PPDT. PPDT, in the last election, we were able to support it, of course, through resources from benefactors, to decentralize these services to 8 other regions, which total to 9. That increased access to justice. So when we talk about over-legislation around elections, we are looking at it from a perspective. It's just that perhaps we may not have enough time to unpack in detail the type of things we are seeing that do not necessarily move the country forward. What we are saying is the laws that exist as they are, if we follow the laws, would we have credible elections or not? Can we have answers in this room? Have some of you looked at electoral laws, campaign finance laws, and whatnot, the Elections Act? If we just implemented as it is, would we have credible elections? We would, right? So the challenge is we cannot, and like our executive director from ICJ, Mr. Eric has mentioned, yes, it is important to keep, making sure we expand our legislation based on our experiences. But there are so many other factors that we need to reflect on. We cannot just be running to legislate only without addressing underlying issues. For example, Gen Z's protested. Did you not see a law come up about not suppressing, sorry, trying to control demonstrations? Did you not see a law? Is that really where we want to be as a country, such that if we are unhappy with the level of dissent or your reactions to something, then we create a law to gag you or to control you? You understand? So that in itself is how we are destroying our systems of democratic engagement. The other thing I would like us to talk about is someone mentioned, I think it was Anne Kathurima, that mentioned that Baba is still somehow in cabinet. That is state capture in its full swing. I will tell you, state capture does not state capture or democracy capture does not necessarily mean that the state is the one oppressing the people. Sometimes the state is captured because you will lose run for elections, you will not field agents, you will say elections were stolen, and then you'll go to the streets. There will be economic sabotage. Before you know it, the government cooperates. They say, okay, we can have a handshake. First, the government usually says, there will be no handshake. No handshake. Is that not true? Before you know it, there's a handshake. When the handshake happens, you see people smiling, and they'll walk around like nothing is happening. Now they look the other way as oppression is happening. Where? In the country. Is that not state capture? It is. It is a form of capture where the opposition has learned a skill that knows how to not win elections. However, you are literally the most important person in the country because you become a life support machine for the regime, right? So we have to reflect on these things deeply. We don't exist in these spaces to depress anyone. We also exist in these spaces to say the truth. Sometimes the truth is not what you want to hear. We have a lot of, wonderful democratic governance statements that we can give, but unless we are trying to look and reflect into the underlying issues and challenges that we are facing, it's like putting lipstick on a pig. Yeah? Because so much is happening underneath, and this is a conversation for East Africa, not just Kenya. So while Kenya has a lot to say in terms of laws, we're reflecting as a bloc. What can we do collaboratively to ensure that even these cross-border collaborations by regimes do not succeed and keep oppressing the people. Lastly, allow me to mention something about the suppression of political processes, the legitimate political processes. I think in terms of the situations we find ourselves in, even the legislators we have in office, the lack of goodwill is something that we must address. Yeah? We put these people in office, a member of parliament, whether you're a senator, women rep, it doesn't matter. You go there, you're supposed to legislate on behalf of the people. Do you know what happens? I will give you an example. When they needed to impeach Gachagua, how fast was it done? How fast? Fast. How many weeks? Maximum 2, right? It was 10 days, right? Do you know the struggle we have had? Ruth is here. She's actually she said she's here in ICJ capacity, so I will look away. She gave me a bad eye. But do you know how many legislations around electoral laws we have tried to push? ICJ is here, they can tell you. And many of you that work around this space. Do you know how frustrating it is? Sometimes we're using donor money, right? They want to see answers. The USAID will tell you, but you have been working on this for the past, you've been pushing and nothing is happening. And I'm glad they have a president called Donald Trump. They're seeing Pepe. Yeah? They're seeing fire because finally they understand the struggle of authoritarianism. Sometimes when you come to Africa, it's a story. Yeah? Africans, this is not moving, that is not moving. For once, we have American organizations wanting to come to Africa to benchmark on what it means to strengthen civil society. We welcome them. It's delighting to watch because finally they understand. When the shoe is on the other foot, if it pinches, you will feel it. Thank you.
Tito?
Again, asante sana David, Tuku, Mburu, and the colleagues. I'm again defeated by the eloquence from my colleagues. But I wanted to give one example to Mzee Eric question that the middle class crisis, how are we tackling it? And I'm also going to pose further question through an example. I remember in high school, we used to raise demands for the most pet issues. We would say today we understand that you are supposed to use 3 kilos of sugar in the porridge, and we are aware that you only used 1 kilo. So the porridge was not sugar enough. So we want those 2 kilos with an ultimatum of boycotting and protesting. So in some instances, they would never bring the sugar, and then we'll say we are not going to classes. However, that was not a unanimous position. So there would be people who, we used to call them Kisomo, Johnny Kisomo. These people are here to to get this division 1 of PCB and be a medical doctor. So we adopted a strategy. We would make sure that once we are protesting, whether it's a march, they are at the forefront. They're in front, and we'll make sure that they're in front. So I don't know how this would work in the contemporary reality where people with money, they would support the regime that enables them to keep earning more money. Can we cancel them? How possible is it in Tanzania to cancel diamond platinums? We have tried to unsubscribe. I remember this other week people were saying celebrities who are babysitting the regime don't like their posts. We're trying to find out how can we do to make sure that they feel like they can't be without us. So it's a question that we can go and reflect further on how to counter this middle class crisis. And all that has been said, I understand that we still have contestation on the approaches, tactics on how to go about. We have got to disagree. And we have got to disagree, and then ultimately we agree. And then all that being said, I'm saying that Aluta, continue.
Wow.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Aluta, victory is certain, right? Thank you so much. Let's appreciate that panel some more. My parting shot will be the opening lines of the book by Chinua Achebe, The Trouble with Nigeria. I'll paraphrase it. The trouble with Africa is simply and squarely a failure of leadership. There is nothing basically wrong with the African character. There is nothing wrong with African land or climate or water or air or anything else. The African problem is the unwillingness or inability of its leaders to rise to the responsibility, to the challenge of personal example, which are the hallmarks of true leadership. Enjoy your lunch. Let's meet at 2:30. Yes.
That QR code and kindly register. A lot of you have registered, but